You're listening to the Lux Life Discovered podcast, where we talk with people who are living a lifestyle that reflects their passion, because we believe everyone should be living their best life, their Lux Life. The show is hosted by Rick Steiner with Steiner Event Group, a premier national event planning company, and co-hosted by Shannon Richmond, the Vice President of the Panama City Beach Chamber of Commerce. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell to get notifications of future episodes. The show is produced by 30A Media and is broadcast on your favorite podcast outlets, as well as YouTube, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TVs, and other major brand smart TVs.
Hello, I'm Rick Steiner. Welcome to Lux Life Discovered. My guest today is Nathan Brown, and Nathan is someone that I have discovered probably a couple, or maybe longer than that, a few months ago. Follow him on Instagram. Tell us about your art that you do, because you're an artist, but it's not just your typical artist.
Yeah, so I'm primarily a mural artist. I do large scale public art pieces, mainly with paint. And I get to travel all over the country and paint murals, huge, multi-story pieces. And I get to meet a lot of people in a lot of cool cities and get to discover places I normally wouldn't be on my radar. So it's a pretty wild job, and I'm really thankful that I get to do it.
So when you say the mural artist, we're talking like the side of 2 and 3 story buildings, 1 story, but they're huge pieces. Do you see buildings that intrigue you and you think, man, I'd like to paint that? Or are you contacted by these different groups?
It's both. There's been many times where I would drive by a certain building, many times, in cities that I frequent. There's actually one right down the street from me here in Chattanooga that I drove by every day for about a year. And I I thought it was abandoned, and I saw somebody walk into that building one day. And so I just like hightailed it over there, yelled at them. They probably thought I was crazy, and asked them if they owned the building, and they ended up being the building owner. I told them what I did for a living, showed them some of my work, and I ended up doing a huge community mural because of that. It was an entire block long building and
Oh,
about
wow.
3 stories tall. So I rarely get to get those, but like it's really nice when I get to do like a community piece, that was sponsored by paint companies, and I got the whole community together to transform a building that was basically decrepit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I definitely approach people that own buildings because of the shape of the building or the location. But most of the time, everybody from developers, architects, interior and exterior decorators all reach out to me when they have like a new development or want to refresh a space. And I do a lot of interior pieces, a lot of interior murals, but primarily large scale, multi-story or just super long murals covering
Yeah.
whole buildings.
Okay, so from someone who's not an artist and does not have that talent, how do you look at a project like that? And even to me, that would be like total, like just deer in the headlight look. It's like, you want me to do what? But how do you get
Yeah.
that vision because of all the different, the windows, the whole design of the building and stuff? So how does that,
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I
You're
was
my
gonna say,
bad.
how does that evolve? Yeah.
So usually it's if somebody reaches out to me with an inquiry, they'll tell me, hey, we have this space, we want to do something with it, we don't know what. Sometimes they do have a vision and like a whole, plan. But a lot of the times it's somebody finds my work and then they want to do something based on the work that they've seen of mine in some form or fashion. And usually it's like my first thing is I want to see the wall. A lot of the time since I travel all over the country and even I've painted a lot over in Europe. I got to see a photo of the wall at least. That way I can kind of get an idea of like, every wall is different, every space is different, every environment's different. And I kind of take all of that into consideration when I'm, planning out, what I'm going to do, especially with the shape of the wall. That can dictate, so many different types of forms and things. So yeah, that's my first first thing I need is like send me I want to see the space and visualize, what could be done, and then let's talk inspirations and all that.
Okay, good deal. So where did your love for art come from? Has this been something that you enjoyed since you were, a young child, or how did this,
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
curious how you
Okay.
went from like a typical, like the art sketch to, I want to do murals on buildings on a large scale.
Yeah. Oh, Well, most of it, so I was born in Los Angeles and I was there until I was about 12 years old. And so growing up in Los Angeles, I grew up pretty much in this, not inner city, but real close to downtown. And I was, driving around when I was younger, going around skateboarding, riding my bikes. I would see these big, huge, beautiful murals everywhere. And I was surrounded by culture and art. And when I was about 12 years old, I got whisked away to Nashville. My family moved to Nashville. And so I was missing all of that, skateboarding, culture, murals, vibrancy. And I think that was like when art clicked and I started sketching and I did graffiti growing up. It was just because I saw that growing up, and it was just a really fun outlet. It kind of paired up with skateboarding a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, since I moved to Nashville when I was about 12, it was, I missed all of, all the culture and the art and the vibrancy of murals and just, public art. And that was kind of when I was like, okay, I want to do art in some way or another. And graffiti was sort of my first step because I wanted to paint skateboards and do skate graphics. Graffiti was really big in the 90s when I was growing up. And so yeah, I kind of did that for a while. And graffiti is not super sustainable, but it's a really good outlet to kind of figure out doing public art because essentially we were doing public art
Right.
just with a very gray area. But it was a good learning experience. And for some reason, I always just gravitated towards public art and being around people and being out in the outdoors. I wanted to be outside all the time. So it was sort of just a natural thing that, going from, Los Angeles to Nashville, needing that, that vibrancy and color and all that stuff, sort of like transforming into graffiti and then graffiti eventually transforming into, public art, which I never thought I'd be able to make a living doing this.
Right. When you first approached someone about doing a mural on the side of a building,
Yeah.
what was their reaction? Was it a positive reaction, or did you meet some where you met with some like hesitancy at first?
Oh, definitely. Especially, when the mural stuff didn't really pop off, especially here in the South until about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Okay.
So before that, I wanted an outlet. I loved painting large scale. I had done graffiti, in quite a few places. And so I wanted to continue painting outside. And I started seeing, traditional historic murals popping up. And so I started approaching business owners with, some cool walls. And most of them didn't want anything to do with it. They were like, that's graffiti. We don't want that. You're gonna bring gangs into the mix and blah, blah, blah. And honestly, most graffiti writers that I know, some of the most well-known ones and all the way down to myself, none of us were gang affiliated or anything like
Right.
that. We were just art kids that, had a different sort of an alternative outlet. So yeah, most of the time, building owners, it took a lot of convincing and having to paint in not so public areas. Sometimes building owners, if they didn't have like a super public off a main street area where everybody could see it driving by, they would be okay
Yeah.
with it. Yeah, and sometimes there was a couple walls that I had where there's a couple business owners that let me paint their wall, but they're like, when you're done, take a photo and then paint over it. So
No.
there was a wall that was like a revolving canvas, but it was great because I got to practice before putting my stuff out there in the streets.
So you
So
painted it
that
and then had to cover it up.
yeah.
Interesting. I would have never thought about that. So what
Yeah,
was
it
your
was
reaction when they told you that?
I mean, knowing like coming from a graffiti background, I knew that my art was temporary. So knowing that kind of prepped me for like, okay, even though I spent hours making this piece or
Yeah.
even a couple days or more, as long as I document it, document the process, take a really solid, good high res photo of it, so I have it forever. It's all good. It's temporary. I mean, even with the murals that I do now, there's a ton of development in Nashville,
Really?
where I've got probably 20 or 30, large scale pieces around town. But just in the past few years, I think about six of those huge ones went away because of development. So in a sense, it's all temporary. And
Yeah.
I've always kept that in mind. And that's why I document everything that I do really well,
Well, that
or
makes
as
sense. I
best I
never thought about that, but that does
can.
make sense. And good, good that you're documenting it. So you thought
Got
about
to.
that rather than after the fact. It's like, oh man, I wish I had a good picture of that. So,
Yeah,
so
there has
where?
been times where
Oh,
that has happened where I missed out or like, my SD card fried or the GoPro wasn't running right. And, it's in a city that I haven't been to ever. And who knows if I'll be able to make it there again. So there's been a few times. And there's also been a few times where I didn't sign my mural and
Oh
had to have somebody
no.
else do
Really? Oh no.
it.
That's crazy.
I, yeah.
So
Sorry.
no, that's great. Where was the most unique place that you went internationally to do a painting that was a bigger surprise to you, I guess, or the most
Oh,
challenging?
wow. I would say so. All of 2018 and 19, I was living in Budapest. I had an artist residency there,
Okay.
and that turned into like a year-long thing. And I've always wanted to live in Europe, so kind of worked it out and made it happen. There's in Europe, there's a lot of big mural festivals and street art festivals and graffiti jams. There's during the summertime, usually there's like one every weekend in some city around Europe.
Interesting.
I got invited to paint one called the Meeting of Styles in Kosovo, in Pristina, Kosovo, which is a country and a city I never thought I would go to. Sometimes you only know of a place what you see on the news or
Right.
things like that. Um, Kosovo and Pristina, the capital in general, was one of the most warmest welcomes in Eastern Europe I've ever had. One of the coolest cities. The food, the culture, just this the city funded about 100 artists from all over the world to come into the city and take over entire city blocks. So we were painting like
Wow.
mile-long murals with 100 other artists taking over whole parts of town, making like a massive walking gallery. And I thought that was one of the coolest things the city's ever done. I mean, I know there's other cities that have done that for years, but I think this city and Kosovo in general, one of its first few times, doing an initiative like this. And I thought that was amazing that the city, funded it. And I don't know if that was from like private donations or I don't think it was from taxes, but it was from a lot of donations and
Right.
some private funding. But that was probably one of the most surprising, coolest, warmest places. I mean, the people, the culture. We have a lot of American ties there because of NATO stuff, and everybody speaks great English, which helps a lot for an American like me that only knows one language for the most part. That was literally one of the best experiences that I've ever had. That was in 2019, in July of 2019, and I still talk to a lot of those people that I met, that week that we were painting, to this day, like weekly. So it
Wow.
was a very enriching experience, and I would go back in a heartbeat.
So the 12-year-old little boy that moved to Nashville never thought saw that coming.
Not at all, not one bit, not one bit.
So what
No,
was
I've
it?
had a few careers before this, so
Okay.
I'm very thankful to be doing this.
Well, yeah, it's exciting. So your time in Budapest, what
Yes.
what was that like?
It was, I mean, moving to a country where I, don't really know anybody. I only knew maybe two people because of my art residency, but I had just recently met them. So moving to a country, not knowing the language, it's a really tough, slightly impossible language to learn. Phonetically, it's just so different to English that I was able to get around okay, but to really learn it, it probably would have taken a decade.
Yeah.
I mean, it was terrifying, amazing. The city is incredible architecture wise. It's beautiful. It's Europe. You walk everywhere. I skateboarded and rode my bike and walked, more than I ever have in my entire life. I walked around about 5 miles a day, 5 miles a day for no reason, just to,
See
doing
it.
normal things. So, living in like a village mentality, center of a city, I would do that all over again too. It's incredible just to like walk out your door and the entire world is there. And being able to travel to like different parts of Europe in like an hour, 2 hours,
Right.
where there was like popping on a plane for, $30, $40 or just jumping on a train. I remember meeting up with friends for an afternoon in Austria and Vienna.
That's
So it was absolutely, I recommend anybody that's ever thought about moving abroad or studying abroad or just doing it. I mean, I met, whole families from America that moved to Budapest just to try it out, just to see and like give their, young kids an experience and in culture and learn a new language.
interesting.
I
Yeah.
I loved it. I miss it, and it was I definitely learned a lot because the arts in Europe and especially Budapest and all around that part of Europe. are ingrained into people's curriculum from day one. So I felt like I had a lot to learn, and I felt like I soaked in a lot, met with a lot of artists that had a lot to offer. So I mean, it was a nice education for sure.
What a wild experience. That's awesome. So
I love it.
what was your most challenging? I mean, I
Over
know that
there,
anywhere, like is there anything that like stands out that you, uh, a project you started that you're like, oh my gosh, this is nothing like I planned?
there's been
Or,
a few of those. But there was one about 2 years ago that was it was more of a big corporate. It was a I was tasked to do see 9 50-foot by 12-foot murals in one building.
oh,
But what they didn't tell me was the building was in mid construction, like walls,
oh,
ceilings, the actual exterior walls were still being built, and it was just a timing thing on contractor's end or developer's end. Had me in a little bit too early. So I was literally, people were building ceilings and walls around me while I was painting. And like there was a few times where
interesting.
like walls got destroyed or broken.
That
It
you'd
was
already
just one of
worked
those things.
on?
Yeah, it was a mess. So it was really all about timing. And so from that point on, anytime it's like a new construction project, I definitely am like very vocal about like, hey, have me at the very end. Think of it as a massive painting that, is somewhat sensitive. But that was probably one of the craziest experiences I've ever had because it was supposed to be a 3-week project and it ended up taking 4 months.
Oh gosh,
So it
that's
was
yeah.
it was I was exhausted by the end of that.
Well, I'm sure, and I'm
Um, you know,
sure after you paint a wall and all of a sudden it's destroyed, you're like, seriously?
Yeah,
You
there
have
was a
to,
few instances with just that project alone with that, and it was just chaos because there was 1,000 construction workers, and it was a 25, 30-story building. So it was just utter chaos. And there's always things like, especially doing that was an interior project, but most of my stuff is outdoor, and I've had to deal with like tornado warnings and hail and rain and being way up in a boom lift, and I was painting a 7-story mural in Burbank, California, this past September and I was like right basically in a canyon, right next to the Sierra Nevadas and whatever mountain range is right in Burbank. And those winds got howling, towards the evening and being 7 stories up in a boom lift, you're just swaying like this.
oh gosh.
And that was pretty terrifying. And I was hoping the ground was, very stable and my boom lift was very stable. So there's weather being outside, you never know, you can't control it. So it's all of my projects when it's, public art, it's weather, TBD.
That's
Hopefully
true.
I
Yeah.
got always, pray for good weather and sometimes there's a lot of characters. I've had people throw stuff
I
at
was going to
me.
ask you about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I've had people yell horrible things at me, but most of the time, 99% of the time, it's like people are just curious about what I'm doing, especially when I'm painting a huge building. And actually that building in Burbank, I had a really cool visitor. I saw them driving by and I saw this crazy old car, probably from like the early 1900s drive by multiple times in one day. And finally this guy yells out of it and, asked what I was doing. And I told him and I looked down and it was Jay Leno.
Really
Yeah,
interesting.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I've got to meet some really cool people and some really wild characters, and yeah, I mean, you just never know. Every job is different.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So, like when you decide your project then or the building, how do you select the paint, the design, all of that that goes into it? I know a lot of it has to do with if the client has a vision, but if they don't
Yeah.
have a particular vision, how do you determine what you want to do?
Well, I normally go through, I try to get as much info out of them as possible. Like, especially if it's like a corporation or something like that, I usually want to make sure that I, follow their brand protocol, their color palettes and things like that. But I mean, a lot of time I get to primarily do like my own work, which is primarily geometric gradient shapes and colors basically
Yeah.
that are, some of it looks like very landscapey and a lot of geometric gradient depth in 3D. I primarily get to do that. And if I get to do my own thing, if it's pretty much like, hey, we want your work, stick to these color palettes and a lot of the time I get, just a very small amount of direction. And then I get like a lot of freedom, which is like the best. I'll do my best work. The more
Right.
freedom I have, the better the piece.
Yeah.
I swear by it. Yeah, I mean that's great because then it's like I kind of take, the shape of the building, whether it's like a crazy brick wall or a very smooth wall, kind of like the environment and the building itself sort of dictate like what I'm going to do. And everyone's different. So I try to like, utilize letting the wall talk to me basically
Yeah.
and kind of like guiding me on what to do. And that's, I mean, when I have a lot of freedom, that's kind of like my process with that is like what I start with like one shape and then I just kind of build on that. And I usually don't know what's going to happen until I start working.
Really
A lot,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of the time I'll have like some sort of a mock-up idea. And that's kind of like my caveat is that this is 80% of what it's going to be. It's basically going to be this. But once I start painting, I'm going to move things around. I'm going to change colors and kind of like, it's like a kind of a freestyle.
Yeah. Well, like you
But
said, it's allowing
what,
the creativity to take over and the building speak to you and
yeah.
display what's, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's pretty fun. And, if I do have like, say there's a client that has, a full vision, like I want, cars and skyscrapers or whatever and palm trees, and then, but I can do it in my style. There's that, and then it's like, okay, well, let me figure out how to do my take on that. And then, yeah, usually if they don't have color preferences, then I just kind of like go wild with that, and I'll put together a few, like usually three concepts just to show, and I'll mock it up on the building if I have a good photograph of the building. That way a client can see what something would, it is a computer rendering, so it's a lot different than paint and texture, but it'll allow the client to really have a good idea of what, this type of piece in this color palette would look like. And that's really fun. I love mocking stuff up on the wall because it really sometimes a really good design, just by itself doesn't look great on a building, depending on the environment and the shape of the building, all that kind of
Sure.
stuff.
Well,
Um,
we're fortunate after you've been all over the world and all over the US doing your painting. We're local or lucky enough to have one fairly close to us in Defuniak Springs that you did.
yeah,
How did that
yeah.
one come about?
And so client actually is a developer that reached out to me,
Okay.
just send me an email. I think it might have been a referral, but it wasn't really clear. Found my work, pulled a few things. And so my first email from them was like, hey, I like this work and this work and this work. What can you do that has to do with Defuniak Springs, Florida? The beaches, yes, but the interior of Florida, the Everglades, all those things, the animals, the plants, flora, the fauna. And it was a style that I kind of used to do when I was a graffiti writer. It was very like illustrative, and compared to like my real rigid geometric gradient type work.
Mhm.
And I guess they saw that on my website and my portfolio site, and they wanted that style. So I got to dive in, and I probably did about 20 different concepts and mock-ups until we like nailed it. And it was actually like a mix of like the client saying, oh, I don't know if I like that. And I was like, you know what? I actually don't like that. And we kind of whittled it down from like, 20 to, five, and then those five down to one. And
Wow.
that was my first time in Defuniak. I'd been to 30A and Rosemary Beach and all over Florida, Miami. I spent a ton of time in Miami, but that was my first time in Defuniak. And man, I mean the wall. When he sent me a photo of the wall, I was in. I was like a
Oh, really?
big,
It's
beautiful
just,
white
yeah,
wall,
yeah.
in a historic, downtown. And then when I started researching the Defuniak, I was like, wow, what is this lake in the middle of it? Just there was a lot of intriguing things and a lot of cool history that drew me to it. And I try to incorporate, some of that, but this was, meant to be just a really beautiful piece that had a lot of parts of like the bigger Florida,
Right.
and not just specifically Defuniak, because I think there were a few like historical murals and which are needed. I hope every town paints a historical mural that kind of like, tells like a full story. This one kind of tells a story, but it is more of the story of Florida, the vision of the client, and some, some really cool like there's a swirling element to it, and I wanted to like, that shape was of the perfectly round lake in the middle of the city. And
Yeah.
so there's like little hidden things and little, minute details, that little Easter eggs in there,
That's neat.
that, I hope people find. And it seems like people haven't, I've seen a lot of photos taken in front of it. So it's really cool to see people interact with it. It makes me happy. And I'm glad that, people seem to like it.
And you did sign that wall.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure now. Okay.
I
You
need
know
to
what,
go
you're
look. You're
gonna
gonna make me
play
go look.
now.
Yeah, you're gonna make me go look now.
Okay.
Um, but that was super. It was a crazy. It was like middle of July, so like I remember just
Oh,
being
hot. Yeah.
insanely hot. It was raining every day, so it was like an hour break of just pouring down rain midday and then just steam.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yes.
it was that
Welcome to
was
Florida. Yeah.
yeah. I think I drank like 2 gallons of water a day, and it was fun. I mean, I met so many cool people. Everybody was lovely, and there was a lot of people that came out just to see what I was doing. And since it was only like a 2-story wall, I was able to connect with everybody a
Yeah.
little bit easier than if I'm way up and
Sure.
stuck up 6 stories up. So it was really cool. I got to meet. I mean, I was there for July 4th, so I got to hang out during the July 4th parade
Oh,
and
yeah.
got to
Small
meet.
towns do a great job with their
It was
4th of July
wonderful.
celebrations. Yeah.
It was so much fun, and it was funny. Like this tends to happen in a lot of cities that I visit, but I've never been to Defuniak before, and there's this guy that came riding up on a bike, and we started chatting, and he was in the music industry. He was a songwriter. I think he's pretty well known, and my mom was in the music industry in Nashville, and he had worked with my mom before,
Oh, really?
and I thought that I mean it's just like small world type
Yeah.
stuff,
Oh, yeah. You
and
never
that's the
know.
other.
That's true.
Never know. And that's the beauty of like being able to travel and do public work because you never know who you're going to meet and like how many like how far separated, how closely together people friends or extended friends know each other. It's been pretty amazing to encounter a lot of that kind of stuff.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, Nathan,
Yes.
this has been fun. I mean, I can't believe the time is already gone. We're going to put your
Oh
information
yeah.
on the screen.
Okay.
Let people know how to reach you if they want to talk to you about your work, painting some great mural for them or project.
Cool.
So,
Yeah. My site's right there at the
okay.
at the bottom underneath my face. You can catch me on Instagram, and then there's my website with my portfolio of everything I've done all over the world. So
Okay.
hit
Awesome.
me up
Well, I
and
tell
check
you
it
what,
out.
I'm glad you replied to my message on Instagram because I'm sure you get a lot of messages. So I appreciate you doing that. And I
Thank
really
you
enjoyed talking with you. I can't wait to
very much.
do more research and to watch you do even greater things.
Well, thank you so much, and
So,
thank you for your time, and thanks for inviting me. This was really fun.
oh, you're welcome. All right. And that concludes our episode of Lux Life Discovered. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Check out Lux Life Discovered on Facebook and Instagram and on 30a.tv. See you next time on Lux Life Discovered.